Anyone who beats their male or female slave with the rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result, but they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. We're going to deal with that today. When understanding any kind of communication, whether written or spoken, it's important to pay attention to context. Because words have multiple definitions, we use context to help determine the meaning. In the highlighted passage, context will help to alleviate any confusion regarding the text. I'll be particularly paying close attention to the context of the chapter. At first glance, the verse in question seems to be quite harsh, where the slave could be beaten as long as it doesn't result in death and the perpetrator is off the hook. But is that what the text is saying? Before I get into it, I want to encourage those who are listening to go ahead and like this video and share it with others, because this verse is definitely used as a proof text against morality as laid forth in the scriptures. I won't go in depth on the topic of slavery in this video. I have a couple of videos on this channel relating to slavery. I'll leave the link in the description. So let's go ahead and look at verse 12. Anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death. However, if it is not done intentionally, but God lets it happen, they are to flee to a place I will designate. But if anyone schemes and kills someone deliberately, that person is to be taken from my altar and put to death. Please pay close attention to the word if, which indicates that what follows will be a conditional statement. So the passage is not indicating that one should strike someone with a deadly blow, but indicates how it should be dealt with if it were to occur. If it was intentional and premeditated, if someone schemes and kills someone deliberately, the scripture indicates that that will be a capital punishment and the person will be put to death. In certain states in the US, that will be considered murder 1 or murder in the first degree. If it wasn't intentional, the person is to flee to a city designated for the purpose of being a safe haven, just in case someone wanted to take revenge on a person for the crime. Verse 18. If people quarrel and one person hits another with a stone or with their fist, and the victim does not die, but is confined to bed, the one who struck the blow will not be held liable if the other person can get up and walk around outside with a staff. However, the guilty party must pay the injured person for any loss of time and see that that victim is completely healed. Again, this verse starts with a conditional statement. If people quarrel and someone gets physically assaulted but doesn't die, this is how it should be dealt with. What this is not saying is that people should physically assault other people. If the injured person doesn't die but is able to get up and walk around, the guilty party is not liable. Liable for what? They are not to be put to death. Why? Because the person didn't die. They are liable to pay for the person missing work. Verse 20, which is the very next verse. Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result, but they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. This is a continuation of the previous conditional statement. If someone beats their servant and they die, they are to be put to death as laid out in verses 12 through 14. But if the servant doesn't die, they are not to be punished. In other words, they are not to be put to death. Verses 18 and 19 says the same thing. If two people quarrel and one person hits the other and the person does not die, they are not liable, meaning they are not to be put to death. In this case, it's the servant or slave. The person who beats them also will not be punished or put to death if the slave doesn't die. I hope this is clear. The difference in this case, in the case in verses 18 and 19, is that the perpetrator has to pay a fine for the injured person missing work. In these verses, starting at verse 20, that penalty is eliminated because the slave is their property, which means that the only money that was lost was by the guilty party. What this doesn't mean is that the guilty party is off the hook. Because if there are visible injuries, such as a missing tooth, the slave or servant is to go free. So let me summarize. If someone commits murder, they are to receive the death penalty, including if a slave owner beats their slave to death. However, if the slave doesn't die, they are not to receive the death penalty, nor will they pay a fine for lost wages, because the slave or servant works for them. If the slave or servant has visible injuries such as a missing tooth, they are to go free.